Tyon Grant-Foster is officially a Zag, giving Mark Few an insanely deep team capable of contending for a national title.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Wednesday and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Randy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Well, folks, huge news for the Zags today. Tyon Grant-Foster, the former WAC Player of the Year, has committed to Gonzaga out of the transfer portal. We're going to break down his game. We're going to break down his fit in Spokane with this current roster, what it means for the lineup and rotation for this upcoming season. We're also going to talk about what's next for the Zags, how many more additions we expect on this year's roster, where they might turn their attention now that they have landed their starting small forward. But first, we got to talk Tyon Grant-Foster. So excited about this. Now, he made his commitment on Wednesday. It was announced by Joe Tipton of On3. Tyon himself announced it on Instagram. The Zags media team has already confirmed it. There is still a pending waiver. And I think that that is an important place to kind of start the conversation, is he does need to be approved for a waiver by the NCAA in order to play another season of college basketball. Grant-Foster spent 2 years at the junior college level, 1 full season at Kansas, 2 full seasons at Grand Canyon. He had two seasons basically entirely missed in between there as well. But for Tyon Grant-Foster, it's just kind of a unique situation with having 2 JuCo years, 2 Grand Canyon years, 1 year at Kansas. I think he'll probably get a waiver. I suspect Gonzaga would not have poured so much time and energy into recruiting him and securing this commitment if they didn't feel like it was at least likely that he would be given a waiver. But it is obviously an important caveat with this commitment at this point. That's enough of us kind of being a stick in the mud about this. Let's have some excitement. Tyon Grant-Foster is absolutely outstanding player. 6'7" wing from Kansas City. Again, he began his career at Indiana Hills Community College, where he was a superstar for 2 years at the junior college level, then transferred to Kansas. He was the number 2 ranked junior college player in the country when he joined the Jayhawks. He played 22 games, played about 8 minutes per game as a freshman for the Jayhawks. Again, this was the COVID season as well, so in theory, he should get that eligibility. I'm going to go back to that real quick, because I think that the odds of him getting his extra year of eligibility here are pretty high, since that 1 full season that he played at Kansas did come during the COVID season, the 2021 season. So I would think that that's it makes it even more likely for Grant-Foster. Regardless, didn't do a whole lot at Kansas. Again, 8 minutes per game, 3 points, 2 boards. But then he transferred to DePaul. And at halftime of his first game with DePaul, Tyon Grant-Foster suffered he collapsed. He collapsed on the floor at halftime in the locker room. Was foaming at the mouth. It was just a terrifying scene. The training staff was able to resuscitate him. He had his heart shocked 3 times while he was at the hospital, which is just, again, horrifying. He was told by medical professionals that he was not going to play basketball again due to all the scarring on his heart from the surgeries that he had. He then had collapsed during a pickup game later and had another heart surgery. But 16 months after that, he was cleared to return to the court. So again, he played just 1/2 of a basketball game at DePaul in the 21-22 season, sat out the entirety of the 22-23 season while he was still recovering from that, and then landed at Grand Canyon for the 23-24 season. Not only did he, in fact, return to play high-level college basketball, he was one of the best players in the country. In his first season at Grand Canyon in 23-24, he averaged 20.1 points per game, 6.1 rebounds, shot 50% on 2-pointers, shot 33% from 3. He also shot about 74.5% from the free throw line. And folks, that was on over 8 free throw attempts per game. Tyon Grant-Foster's first year at Grand Canyon, he was otherworldly good. The Lopes just gave him the ball. He was an incredibly high usage player. He was their point guard. He was their wing. He was their defensive anchor. He led the team in steals and blocks. Like, he was an absolute menace during that season with the Lopes, and he was still effective. I mean, the 33% from 3 is not great. I'll also say that it's the best he's shot in his career. That is a knock on Grant-Foster, but to be that to be number one on the opposing defense's scouting report, to be clearly the best player on your team, to have the best defenders thrown at you, to have teams scheming against you, and to still shoot 50% on 2-pointers as a wing, to get to the free throw line 8 times per game. I mean, he was just tremendous. Again, he was named the WAC Player of the Year. He led the conference in scoring. He was also on the WAC tournament MVP as he got Grand Canyon into the NCAA tournament, where as a 12 seed, they were seeded in Spokane, Washington, to take on the 5 seed in that region, which was the St. Mary's Gales. St. Mary's, I'm sure, was not thrilled with a matchup in Spokane, and they were probably less thrilled after GrantFoster took them down. He went 22 points, 7 boards, and a pair of steals on 6 of 13 shooting against St. Mary's in Grand Canyon's 12-5 upset win. And while they were unable to defeat number 4 seed Alabama, who actually went all the way to the Elite 8 that year, GrantFoster was excellent in that game against the Crimson Tide. He had 29 points, 8 boards, 3 blocks on 9 of 22 shooting in that one. After that, GrantFoster was in the NBA draft process and was very likely going to be selected. It was a very weak draft in 2024. GrantFoster had just come off this excellent scoring season. He was 6'7", has the requisite size and skill set to be an NBA player, but he somewhat surprisingly chose instead to remove himself from the NBA draft process and return to Grand Canyon. And unfortunately, that decision did not go great for him. Unfortunately for GrantFoster at the time, good news for Gonzaga now. GrantFoster returns to Grand Canyon in the 24-25 season, and ankle injuries limited him throughout the year. And frankly, I'm not sure he was ever fully healthy last year. He played 26 games. He started 17 of them, played about 27 and a half minutes per game, but his numbers just weren't nearly as good as they were in his excellent breakout season in 23-24. This past year for Grand Canyon, Foster still averaged just under 15 points per game, averaged about 6 boards and 2 assists. His three-point shooting plummeted to 23%. He was still effective as a 2-point scorer, just dropped from 50 to 48%, but he only shot 68.5% from the free throw line. Now, that was still on 7 attempts per game, so he was great at getting to the line. He just wasn't nearly as good at converting at the free throw line as he's been in the past. Now, he still finished the season strong, which is part of the reason I think that some of those early season numbers are kind of weighing down his season average last year. And I think I trust more what he was able to do for a full season and what he did in the latter part of this last season as compared to the first part of last year where he really, really struggled. In his final 9 games last year for Grand Canyon, GrantFoster averaged 17.5 points, 5 boards, 2.3 assists, shot 31.5% from 3, 59.5% from 2. That's more like what we kind of saw from GrantFoster in his Player of the Year season. So I think we're inclined to believe that the early season stuff last year was a bit more of an aberration than anything else. He had 18 points on 7 of 12 shooting in the WAC tournament in a win over Cal Baptist. And then getting into the NCAA tournament, Grand Canyon was unable to get a W. This year in the NCAA tournament, they faced Maryland, very, very good Maryland roster in the first game. GrantFoster still very good performance, though, 23 points, 4 boards, and 3 assists. He was 3 of 7 from 3 in that loss to the Terps. Some pros and cons on GrantFoster before we get into looking at what this means for the roster, his specific fit on next year's team, all of that. Obviously the pros, he's so big. He's 6'7" wing. He's got the requisite size and length on the perimeter to be incredibly disruptive on both ends of the floor. He's an incredibly highly gifted scorer. He's great at getting downhill. He's going to be an absolute menace in transition, getting out to the bucket. He's going to be a bit like Caleb Battle in some ways. He's not built like him. He's longer and skinnier, but he loves getting downhill. He loves scoring at the rim. I think he's going to be great in transition. His score first mentality is kind of what Gonzaga doesn't have right now in the backcourt. They have 2 great two great front court players in Graham Ike and Braden Huff, who love having the ball, who love scoring the rock. And then they have 2 like really defensive focused wings in Jalen Warley and Emmanuel Innocente. They have a good 3-point shooter in Adam Miller. They have a good facilitator in Braden Smith, but they're kind of missing like a dog, just missing a dude who could go get a bucket, who could kind of bend the defense, be a focal point offensively. And that's what they get here in Tyon GrantFoster. Again, he's also sneakily, he's averaged more than 1.5 blocks per game in each of the last 2 years. He's a good defensive player. I think the level is going to tick up a bit from the WAC to the WCC, but ultimately I expect Grant-Foster to still prove himself as a very good defensive guard. He'll get steals, he'll get blocks, he'll be able to do some stuff, potentially get himself out in transition to get some easy buckets that way. He's also an older prospect, 25, so his experience in college basketball will help this Gonzaga team as well. And he's a great rebounding guard, which Gonzaga's had a lot of great rebounding guards in the past. The cons, the noticeable con, he's just not a great three-point shooter. Career for him is 28% on about 3.5 attempts per game. He's never been a super high volume three-point shooter. I do expect that there's some Ryan Woolridge effect that could happen here. Whereas what I mean by that, for those who do not know, Ryan Woolridge, of course, played at Gonzaga about 5 years ago, and he transferred from North Texas. Never a great three-point shooter at North Texas, came to Gonzaga. His three-point percentage bumped by about 10% because he went from being the focal point of opposing defenses to being like the fourth or fifth option. Grant-Foster is still going to be a high option for Gonzaga, but the defense will be forced to honor Braden Huff and Graham Ike. I suspect Grant-Foster will get a lot of open looks from three. I don't think he's going to shoot like 40% or anything like that, but if he can shoot 33 to 35% on a relatively low volume, you're going to take that happily with everything else that you get from him. Other stuff, the injury history obviously makes him a little bit of a risk, but I think a risk well worth taking. He's a great at getting to the free throw line, not actually a great free throw shooter, something that could get a little frustrating at times this year. And again, this is a negative for him throughout his career, but not one that I think will impact Gonzaga all that much. He's not a facilitator. Like, he's not a playmaker. For his career, he averages 1.4 assists and 2 turnovers. Now, obviously at Grand Canyon, he did not have as many talented teammates around him, and he was not asked to facilitate. He was not asked to be a passer. I think that, again, that'll change a little bit because he'll be in a more of a structured role at Gonzaga, but it is something to note of, like, don't expect him to make a lot of highlight reels because of his passing this upcoming season. But again, that's not what Gonzaga is going to ask him to do. And I think the things that they want him to do are the things that he is most skilled at and has demonstrated a lot of success at in college basketball, which is why this is such a fun and appealing destination, not only for Grant-Foster, but for Gonzaga as well. Well, again, in my mind, Grant-Foster is a lock to start for the Zags. He is going to start next season, assuming this waiver is approved. So what does that mean for the rest of the lineup? And what does that mean for Gonzaga's rotation? Who's maybe getting the bump in the rotation heading into next season? We're going to talk about what we think about that at this point in the offseason coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, the NBA playoffs are in full swing. Chet Holmgren, Andrew Nembhard barreling towards potentially facing each other in the NBA Finals. Every night has delivered highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. So whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on all the NBA action with FanDuel, because FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And folks, literally yesterday, Gonzaga was plus 4,000 to win the national championship. If you got in on those odds, happy for you. If you didn't, they've already dropped to plus 3,000 as Gonzaga adds Tyon Grant-Foster. If you want to get in while the getting's still good, then head to FanDuel right now. It is the perfect time to sign up. If you head to FanDuel right now and place your first $5 bet, if it wins, you will get $200 in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And we're still celebrating and talking about the news out of Spokane that the Zags have landed a commitment from Grand Canyon transfer and former WAC Player of the Year, Tyon Grant-Foster. I want to talk about his fit in Spokane, what this is going to look like with him on the roster next year for the Zags. I think the easiest, simplest way to think about it is that he is your Caliph Battle replacement. In the same way that Adam Miller, the transfer from Arizona State, who Gonzaga landed about a month ago, is your Nolan Hickman replacement, Tyon Grant-Foster is your Caliph Battle replacement. Adam Miller's a 43% three-point shooter who's done most of his damage from beyond the arc. That is the role he's going to fill in Gonzaga's offense. Tyon Grant-Foster, not a great three-point shooter, not a high-volume three-point shooter, but instead a player who loves to get downhill, who loves to score at the rim, who loves to get to the free throw line. That makes him more like Caliph Battle in that way. He is also 6'7", so he gives Gonzaga a ton of length on the perimeter. This has been kind of a focal point for Gonzaga in the players that they have pursued, either in the recruiting classes or in the portal. They're looking at a lot of guys who add some size to their backcourt. Now, their projected starting backcourt is probably still going to be Braden Smith and Adam Miller, who are 6 foot and 6'3". So it's going to look a little similar to the Ryan Nembhard, Nolan Hickman backcourt, which had that same height. But with somebody like Tyon Grant-Foster at the 3, filling in at 6'7", giving a little bit more size. Jalen Warley, 6'7", now likely coming off the bench. Emmanuel Innocente, 6'5". Davis Fogel, 6'7". Steele Venters is 6'7". There's a lot more length and size in this backcourt than there was last year, and Grant-Foster is a very big part of that with what he brings on both ends of the floor, thanks to that size and length. Again, I think what we're going to see a lot of from Tyon Grant-Foster is when plays break down and they need somebody to go get a bucket, just get the ball to Grant-Foster, let him put the ball on the deck, drive to his right, try to get to the rim, try to get to the free throw line. I think he's going to be a menace in transition. I think you'll see a lot of opportunities where he's the one scoring in transition. He loves to get out and run with just that length. He's able to fly up and down the floor quickly. So he'll get a lot of transition buckets. He'll get to the free throw line a bunch. Again, Caleb Battle was an elite free throw shooter and was elite at getting to the free throw line previously in his career. His numbers at the free throw line, he had some games where he got to the free throw line a ton last year, but he didn't do it as much as he had done at previous stops. I think part of that was just Gonzaga's offense didn't really allow as much like one-on-one shot creation, which tends to be where you get to the free throw line, as if you're trying to take somebody off the dribble. Gonzaga doesn't have a lot of guys, doesn't really have a lot of let's clear out and let this guy take somebody off the dribble. So I do think when the opportunity arises, Grant-Foster will do that. But I think it'll also be a lot of, the offense is still going to go through Graham Ike and Braden Huff. Like there's just, that's where the ball is going to go. Maybe that creates some backdoor cutting. Maybe that creates some open looks from 3 where maybe he can shoot it a little bit better or attack the closeouts. If he's on the perimeter and Ike or Huff gets them the ball and he pump fakes, gets a defender in the air, and now he's got a free lane to the basket. That's money for Tyon Grant-Foster. So I think you're going to see a lot of that stuff. I do think it's going to look fairly similar to Caleb Battle, hopefully with a bit more consistency in terms of his overall production. But I think that's the easiest way to kind of conceptualize what Grant-Foster's role is going to look like at Gonzaga next year. He fits the team in terms of positional need. He's got that size, the length, also the experience. Again, similar to Battle, who played 6 years of college basketball, Grant-Foster's coming in as one of the older players in college basketball this year. He also is I think, one way the Zags could utilize him, and this is more just maybe wishful thinking on my part, as it's not something Gonzaga has really done very much recently, at least, but Grant-Foster posted up guards at Grand Canyon. And again, in the WAC, pretty easy if you're 6'7" and you're kind of playing the 1 or the 2, that you're going to have a guy 3-4 inches shorter than you defending you. And so Grant-Foster would go down low and post up and get his opportunities to score. It's a little bit like Nigel Williams-Goss used to do for Gonzaga back in that 2016-17 season. Again, will Gonzaga utilize another post player when they already have Huff and Ike on the floor? I don't know, but there's going to be teams that Gonzaga plays this year where even their small forward is 6'4", 6'5". And if Grant-Foster's got enough size to easily get a bucket on him in the paint, why not? Why not give him the opportunity to do that? It's something that we haven't heard any confirmation that we're going to see that this year, and we won't. Mark Few's not going to tell us that before the season starts, but it's something I'm going to be watching for because I think it'd be fun. Now, in terms of what this means for Gonzaga's lineup and rotation, Tyon Grant-Foster is starting. He's going to start at the 3. In my mind, this means, and I said this when Gonzaga was also pursuing Desmond Claude, if Claude was committed to Gonzaga, he'd start at the 2, and I think Jalen Warley would start at the 3, and Adam Miller would come off the bench. But with Grant-Foster being the addition, he's going to start at the 3. I think Adam Miller is going to start at the 2. Braden Smith will start at the 1, and then Huff and Ike will start in the front court. So Braden Smith at the 1, Adam Miller at the 2, Grant-Foster at the 3, Huff and Ike at the 4 and the 5. That is my projection for the starting lineup. This pushes Jalen Warley to the bench. Again, that's just based on what I was previously projecting till now. Maybe the Zags never had an intention to start Jalen Warley. I don't know, but my read on the situation is now Jalen Warley will be coming off the bench. And this is also tough news for Emmanuel Innocente. And in fact, this might actually impact Emmanuel Innocente more than it impacts Jalen Warley, because now Gonzaga has 2 players coming off the bench. And typically, again, they only play 3 rotation players off the bench, 8, maybe 9 deep, but sometimes as little as 7 deep. And Emmanuel Innocente and Jalen Warley are pretty similar as players. Innocente's 6'5", obviously has the extra experience being in the system. Jalen Warley's been on the team for a year but hasn't played in games yet, but he's 6'7". They're both very good perimeter defenders. Both of them are not scorers. They take good care of the basketball. They look to facilitate, but they don't really look to score. They're very similar as players. And I think if Gonzaga views Jalen Warley as somebody who's going to play big minutes as a rotation wing coming off the bench, I think that could be bad news for Emmanuel Innocente in terms of what his role might look like next season. Obviously, this also bumps both Steele Venters and Davis Fogel further out of the rotation, further down in the rotation, however you want to look at it. I think it's realistic that this maybe is an indication that Davis Fogel could redshirt this upcoming season. Again, no confirmation on that, just a thought. If he's willing to do that, we did see obviously Braden Huff redshirted as an incoming freshman when he got to campus a few years ago. We obviously saw the transfers redshirt last year in Warley and Smith, so it's not uncommon or completely out of the question that Davis Fogel could redshirt this year, because I really don't see playing time materializing for him at this point. And if there's any additional additions, which we'll talk about in the final segment, then there's really not room for Davis Fogel to play a role next year. And then I think we wonder if this means anything for Steele Venters. I don't think that we should make any conclusive assumptions about Steele Venters' health based on the fact that Gonzaga added Tyon Grant-Foster, because they're not super similar players, but the Zags have added 2 6'7" small forwards to the roster since the last time Steele Venters got hurt. I think it may not mean anything super specific, but it also doesn't mean nothing. I don't think it means nothing. And so for Steele Venters, he obviously suffered an injury to miss his entire first season, suffered another injury to miss his entire second season, has now been at Gonzaga for 2 years and has yet to play in an official game. It's possible he's healthy and he's somebody who contributes for Gonzaga off the bench in a specialist three-point shooting role next year. But this is also very much, at least Gonzaga strongly hedging their bet in case he is unable to get back to full health, back to game speed. Again, there's no indication his recovery has not gone well up to this point, but there's a lot between now and actually playing full speed, high level Division I basketball. And you got to hope, obviously, for Steele's sake, that he is able to get healthy and able to contribute. But Gonzaga has made some moves to make it so that if he's not in the picture for next year, they're still going to be set up just fine. Looking at the actual projected lineup and rotation, I already told you the starting five: Smith, Miller, Grant-Foster, Huff, and Ike. Here's kind of how I read the rest of it. I think Jalen Warley is the sixth man, in the sense that I think he plays the most minutes off the bench of anybody on this roster. I think Ismaila Diani is obviously your third big, so I'm going to put him in at kind of seventh. I think he's a true five, but I think he could play with either Ike or Huff, as both of them could play the four. And then I think that's where it's kind of tough between Innocente or Venters. If Venters is healthy, I think he's kind of your eighth guy because he gives you a different look. He's can play the 2, the 3. He's a floor spacer in the way that only Adam Miller on the roster currently is. So if Venters is healthy, I think he's eighth, and that pushes Innocente to ninth, which is kind of where he was most of last year. We kind of thought he would take a jump up in terms of playing time, and maybe he still will, but I think this move makes that a little bit more difficult for Innocente in terms of playing time next year. And then you have the two freshmen, Jefferson and Fogel, kind of at that 10th and 11th spots going into this upcoming season. So what's next? How many more additions do we expect for Gonzaga this season with the lineup and rotation already feeling pretty full? We're going to talk about what might be left for the Zags this offseason coming up here in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Closing out the show, looking ahead. Gonzaga has now made their second transfer portal edition of the offseason, bringing in Grand Canyon's Tyon Grant-Foster in sort of a trade with Grand Canyon, by the way. We didn't mention that, but Dusty Stromer, of course, commits to Grand Canyon from Gonzaga, so it was a bit of a trade at the small forward position. They get Dusty Stromer, we get Tyon Grant-Foster. We've seen this a little bit already. I saw a post on a social media account talking about how Memphis and Kansas State effectively traded Doug McDaniel and PJ Haggerty in the transfer portal. We're going to see more of these. This is not going to be the last time that it happens. It's just a unique thing that for the fact that it was not only them going to the same schools, but that they play the same position. It really does feel like a trade in the sense that Stromer is going to replace a lot of the minutes from Grant-Foster and vice versa for Gonzaga. So what are the next things for Gonzaga? What does this mean for Gonzaga? Well, for starters, I think the easy things we can say. Gonzaga is likely no longer in pursuit of Desmond Claude. Would they love to land Desmond Claude? Sure. They would be incredible if they had Braden Smith, Desmond Claude, and Tyon Grant-Foster in the backcourt. But from a financial perspective, an NIL perspective, a playing time perspective, I don't think it's going to happen. Desmond Claude had listed Gonzaga, Alabama, and Washington in his top three. Alabama canceled a visit that he was scheduled to have with them. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're out, but I wouldn't be surprised if I was a betting man. I might be considering Washington, where they already landed Claude's former teammate at USC, Wesley Yates. I think those two might link up again in Montlake to play for the Huskies this year. It also probably limits their likelihood of landing Neo Avdilas out of the not the transfer portal, a international recruit from Greece who's in the NBA draft process, who we spoke about last week on the show. He's the same position, same type of player as Grant-Foster in a lot of ways. I think Gonzaga would love to have Neo Avdilas, but I think that the toughest part for Avdilas being convinced to come to Gonzaga was going to be playing time, as he's somebody who wants to play big minutes and be a one and done in college and be in the NBA. And now I think that the sales pitch to land Avdilas is just going to be a lot trickier. So I wouldn't be expecting Desmond Claude or Neo Avdilas to be coming to Gonzaga this season. I think Grant-Foster makes both of those potential additions extremely, extremely unlikely. However, I don't think this impacts Gonzaga's pursuit of Spanish guard Mario Saint-Superi, who we spoke about a handful of times on the show. It is still not confirmed as I'm recording this live on Wednesday afternoon, but the expectation is that Gonzaga will in fact land Mario Saint-Superi, 6'3" guard from Spain. It's been reported but not confirmed that he is leaving Spain to come to specifically Gonzaga. So again, I do think that this is happening. I think he's going to be the backup point guard, but I think he's going to be a fringe rotation player for Gonzaga next year. I think he's a developmental piece who's maybe a multi-year guy as opposed to being a big-time contributor right away in year one. And as we already laid out the lineup and rotation for next year, it's pretty easy to see why bringing in another player who's going to play big minutes just really doesn't work with Gonzaga's current roster. It's already pretty darn full. Saint-Superi is incredibly talented, by the way, averaged 6 points, 4 assists at one of the highest levels in the ACB in Spain last year. He's a very, very good player. For the U18 Eurobasket team, he averaged 21 points, 6.5 assists per game. Really good player. Would love for Gonzaga to land him. Do think it's still very likely that will happen. Just wouldn't expect big minutes for him next year. I think the biggest kind of need on the roster for next season still is a backup power forward. And one thing that I've been tinkering with, and we may end up having a longer conversation about this in a different show, but especially if the Zags land Saint-Superi. If Saint-Superi is the backup one, then I think that this makes Jalen Warley's role very kind of confusing in the sense that I think right now Jalen Warley's the backup point guard because he played kind of an on-ball facilitator role at Florida State, even at 6'7". I think he's the backup point guard in the sense that when Braden Smith's not on the floor with the roster as it's currently constructed, I think Jalen Warley would be the one with the ball in his hands. Maybe Grant-Foster could kind of take that role on as well. But I also wonder if the Zags could consider Jalen Warley as kind of the backup four because they don't really have a backup four. And that to me feels like the biggest area of need still on the roster. Now, Jalen Warley is 6'7". He handles the ball like a guard. But in Gonzaga's offense, the way that the power forward is used, they're up at the top of the key. They're doing the dribble handoffs. They're looking to make entry passes down low. I think Jalen Warley could capably fill that role in certain lineups. Against teams that have two bigs, I don't think you want that. Not because Jalen Warley is a little undersized, but because you want him defending on the perimeter. Like, I think his best skill set is as a perimeter defender. So if you're utilizing him to just defend a post player, you're not utilizing him correctly. So I don't think it would be in those lineups, but in certain lineups, maybe you could get away with it. Maybe even Steele Venters could play some backup 4 minutes. The more obvious solution would be Parker Jefferson, and I do think that's probably the most likely outcome, is that if Gonzaga doesn't make an addition at the power forward position this offseason, that Parker Jefferson plays 10 to 15 minutes per game, maybe not even that, 8 to 10 minutes per game as a backup 4. And again, I think for Gonzaga, Diani is still pretty unproven, and fouls are definitely an issue with him. Fouls are also an issue with Graham Ike. Fouls are also an issue with Braden Huff. So you want to have somebody who's willing to give you some minutes in the front court, especially if you get some foul issues. And Jefferson's the most likely a candidate for that role. But if the Zags don't feel like he's ready to play big minutes, or if they want to redshirt him, which I don't think is super likely, but if they did want to do that, I think you could use Jalen Warley or Steele Venters in a pinch at the backup power forward position. But the Zags may also decide to go get somebody in the transfer portal who can fill that role this year as well. But I think the safe conclusion for Gonzaga at this point is that the majority of the rest of the offseason will be spent pursuing recruits in the 2026 recruiting class. Maybe there'll be one more transfer portal edition. Maybe there'll be some St. Superi and a transfer portal edition. Maybe some other international guys they'll take a peek at with some extra scholarship spots that they still have. But I think the majority of the offseason will be focused on the elite 2026 recruiting class that Gonzaga is highly involved in recruiting right now. We talked about this on yesterday's show, so I won't go too far into it. But Gonzaga is reportedly going to host the top-ranked point guard in 2026 in Ikenna Alozie on an official visit. They already have a visit at least tentatively scheduled with the number one small forward and number one overall player in the 2026 recruiting class in Tyron Stokes. Date has not been set for that, but it is rumored. The Zags have also been in contact with the number two ranked power forward in the 2026 class, and Tony Bryant. No official visit set there, but he has drawn interest from the Zags. And then the number 3 center in the 2026 class, Sam Funches, is set to visit Gonzaga either over Hoop Fest weekend or for Craziness in the Kennel in October. So literally 4 of Gonzaga's recruiting targets in 2026 are top 3 players at their respective positions. In the 2026 class, it is clear that Gonzaga is wanting to go into the Pac-12 with a bang. They want to have some high-level recruits, some highly regarded incoming talent on the roster when they start in the Pac-12 in the 2026-27 season. They also may be feeling more confident in their ability to spend big money on players in the 2026 class. If you're wondering, well, how is Gonzaga recruiting so many elite, like top-tier, top 20 talent in the 2026 class? They can't possibly be able to actually make competitive financial offers for those guys. Well, they're going to be getting Pac-12 money starting in 2026, and we don't know exactly what that looks like. We'll have more on Pac-12 media rights and all that stuff coming up when we find out some information, which up to this point, we haven't really learned a whole lot about that, as the Pac-12 and Mountain West are currently in mediation. But that is why I think Gonzaga is maybe more confident in their pursuit of some of the highly regarded prospects in that 2026 recruiting class. And that's where I expect the majority of Gonzaga's attention will be the rest of this offseason. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today. We'll have a lot more on Tyon Grant-Foster, what this means for Gonzaga, where the Zags might be ranked in the preseason, all that and more. Of course, continue to keep you up to date on the NBA playoffs, on Ryan Nembhard's pursuit of getting selected in the NBA draft, all that and more coming your way on a future episode of Locked On Zags. Thanks for sticking with us. It's a great day to be a Zag, as it always is. The Zags got themselves a big dude in Tyon Grant-Foster. Very, very excited about that. But as always, that's going to wrap it up for me today. Looking forward to another show tomorrow at the same time. Until then, though, as always, go Zags.